Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Matt. I'm a landscape designer working, as Pete said, for Cartrefi Conwy Housing Association. And this morning, I'm going to talk about effective community engagement. And you can see on the screen there, getting a clear message from lots of voices. This is one of the trickiest things whenever we're dealing with communities looking to regenerate or carry out any kind of environmental improvement, is making sure that we're listening to the community first and foremost. So just a little bit of background. Who are we? We were formed in 2008. There was a public vote, and we basically inherited all of the housing stock from then Conwy Council. So we've got about 4,000 homes across the county of Conwy. You can see we're not a huge association, but I think there's benefits to being kind of small and flexible, and certainly willing to take on new approaches to the way that we work. And we employ 180 staff. I'm the only landscape person in the entire company, which is fantastic for me. Quite autonomous in my approach to work. And I suppose crucially, just to put this into context, is we, on transfer, when the company was initially formed, there was a directive from Welsh Government called the Welsh Housing Quality Standards. Some of you may be familiar with that. And basically it kind of said, you know, you've got to upgrade all your properties, new windows, new doors, you know, energy efficient gas boilers, all of that kind of good stuff, which we should be doing anyway. And then there was one page in this 20-page booklet which mentioned the WHQS environmental standard. Now, it was a bit of a misnomer, because really this standard was nothing more than a collection of bullet points, kind of concepts to point towards. And at the time, Cartrefi had made a commitment and set aside £3.5 million to spend over 5 years to look at delivering environmental improvements, although at that particular time they didn't truly or really understand what environmental improvements was all about. So that's when I joined the company. So why involve people when we're looking to carry out these kind of schemes? Well, these are people's lives. I don't live in these communities. Our community members do. It's really, really important that we get strong buy-in right from the off. At the end of the day, without our communities, we would not be a business, full stop. And so for that, we need a really, really good understanding of the people and the communities that they live in. And as we're all aware, every community is different geographically, socially, economically. And so we need to kind of, you know, develop a good relationship with our tenants, so that we can understand how we can better serve them going forward in the future. And like it says at the bottom of the screen there, strong communities are good business. I think in the past, where housing providers have had areas of social deprivation, where there will be antisocial behaviour issues and void properties, these are all elements that cost the business money. So if we can create communities where people wish to live for the long term, that's just good business. So just to put this into a little bit of context, and the pictures here refer to Parc Peulwys before we carried out any improvements. Why regenerate? And I think you can just take a second to look at those pictures there. This is kind of typical, dare I say, council housing stock, kind of built, you know, post-war, when there was a demand for I was going to say cheap housing. I think cost-effective housing is more appropriate term, but there was little thought put towards actually creating a community. the kind of key focus was on creating units to keep people dry and warm. And that was at the detriment of the landscape. And I think just looking at whatever areas of green we did have on the estate, they were all green desert, close mown grass, and not even level for kids to play football on. Then I think the question why regenerate in the first place is quite an easy one. So, okay, Matt, you've got some money. And we want you to regenerate this estate. So you need to talk with the community. Well, coming from a background in garden design, I was used to consulting with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and Mr. Jones would like a barbecue and Mrs. Jones would like somewhere to sit in the sun. So obtaining that design brief was a very kind of straightforward affair. Consulting with 800 people, all of which have got a valid opinion, becomes a much more complex situation. So initially started to research, and some of you may be familiar with Cave Space and their Space Shaper toolkit. And I think as I kind of trawled through the internet looking for inspiration as to how I can begin talking effectively with 800 people all at the same time, that really Space Shaper toolkit was the only kind of methodology that was available at that time. And so I started to look at it, and really it was kind of based around a questionnaire. So you needed to form a questionnaire. And I was always aware that, you know, community members have a natural skepticism towards people with clipboards. So I kind of didn't want to take that approach, but we still needed to follow a similar kind of process. But I really like the idea of community workshops where we could get people in an informal setting. Again, I'd always been very skeptical of the kind of typical consultation techniques of using the village hall, where nobody turns up because we've used the village hall. So we really wanted to create something that was embedded within the community environment, if that makes sense. Space Shaper was a really, really good toolkit, rating sites against 41 characteristics. But at the same time, I noted that there were a couple of Achilles heels within this process. And I suppose the first one was that it required a trained facilitator. Well, I wasn't trained, and we kind of wanted to carry out this consultation internally using our own people, because we had housing officers who were familiar faces, you know. The other aspect of the Space Shaper toolkit was that it consulted a balance of between 8 to 18 people. And initially I thought, well, this is really good because it's kind of an even split between users, community members, and professionals who can kind of apply their behind the scenes knowledge, you know, to help form a really kind of balanced approach. However, in my naivety within housing at that time, I soon realized that generally, when you involve community members on a very, very kind of small scale like that, then you're only ever going to listen to the vocal minority. And I wanted to listen to the vocal, the silent majority, because I was very aware that whatever works we did, that there would always be people that said, well, you never spoke to me. You never sought my opinion. So this kind of concentrated consulting group didn't feel appropriate. So we kind of thought about how else we could go around creating a consultation method that was loosely based around the Space Shaper model. So when it came to talking to our communities, well, the reason really was purely to create a design brief. I mean, you know, throughout the process, other information would come through, which would be super useful. But ultimately, this was all about creating a design brief so that we could put a scheme together, a regeneration scheme that would address all of the kind of concerns and aspirations that the community told us. And in doing so, I kind of based it upon Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. So Robert Plutchik was an American psychologist, and he basically kind of come up with this Wheel of Emotions, which categorized a set of positive and negative emotions. And I'll just talk about that in the next slide slightly. We combined this approach by asking our communities 3 questions. And these 3 questions, basically what we did, we had 5 kind of feedback stations. Basically, they were fancy gazebos with some pens and paper and a table and staff members. But we strategically located each of these 5 feedback stations in particular areas of the estate which had very distinct environmental qualities. So either, I think there was one across the road from the school on a nondescript piece of close mown grass green space. We had one in a very urban area, one on the periphery of the estate. So you kind of get the picture. And we asked people what the space was currently used for so that they could respond while they were actually stood in that environment, not on the doorstep. And then we asked what could this space be used for, which kind of put them in a different position, allowing them to respond from a more kind of wider community perspective. And then finally, we gave them a very personal question of how would you use this space? So you can see that Plutchik's Wheels of Emotions, this slide here is basically just segregating those emotions into positive and negative responses. So, and you know, we didn't want anybody to sit on the fence. Sitting on the fence it doesn't really help us in any way. But you can see from some of the emotions there: pride, optimism, pleasure, happiness. And then on the negative side, you know, despair, fear, insecurity, frustration, and so on. So we basically created these feedback stations, and we put a map together, a bit like a treasure trail, so that it was a bit of a family event to help get the children out as well, because children's responses are really, really important, and they often respond with an innocence that adults don't, which is really useful. So on these feedback stations, we would ask again the same kind of set series of questions. You can see in the top photo there, they are all the emotions. So we gave each respondent 3 sticker dots and said, put a sticker on the emotion that you feel you relate most to about this particular area that we're studying. And then basically I just counted them all up and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And then with the responses from the 3 questions, where people just wrote them onto big flip chart sheets, I then took that back to the office and kind of grouped all of those comments into themes. And this helped me to then triangulate these responses to get a clearer picture. How do we process the information? And this was the key, I think. So we recorded all the emotional responses onto a spreadsheet and put them into separate columns, and then went through the process of categorizing all of the other comments into themes. So if someone would say, for example, I've got nowhere to park, we would put it under the category parking. I like to play football, we would put it under the category play. And there's broken glass everywhere, we would put it under the category of antisocial behaviour, etc. And then in order for us then to return back to the community to make sure that we got things right, we produced visual kind of representations of each of the 5 feedback stations, which grouped all of the information and comments just to make sure that we listened correctly in the first place. So here's one of them. This is in Pentraeth, one of the squares there. And we kind of put it together in a very straightforward, plain English way. So it was really quite clear as to what we listened to and what we interpreted as what the community had said to us. So in that, you can see here that this was the kind of, this is in Pentraeth in particular. And these are the responses of all of the Plutchik's model of emotions responses there. And it's really easy because they're all segregated into positive and negative. It means we can produce one of these, which was really striking. Almost 80% of people felt negatively towards that particular space. Now, this is super important because this means I can go back to our leadership team and our board and say, guys, we really need to invest in this area. There were 2 other areas on the estate where it was overwhelmingly positive towards there. So that really helped us in our approach, guiding us towards where we needed to target our investment towards environmental improvements. And then to kind of triangulate the information and drill down to a little bit more detail is when we asked what was this space currently used for. You can see, you know, the top 3 respondents were nothing really, litter and fly tipping, and the top one was antisocial behaviour. So that was really key and really quite telling. When again we looked at the next question, what could this space be used for? This was really reassuring, overwhelmingly for play recreation. You know, we had of the total estate, it was around about 25% of everyone that lived on that estate were below the age of 18. So this told us it was a family estate. This told us that play recreation was super important to the community. And then how would you use this space? And this is a really key question, guys, because this is where we can go back to the community and demonstrate, look, this is how your community feel about this. So that, you know, if we were to put in play recreation and we got some opposition, then we had some kind of evidence base to refer back to. So I suppose just at the end of that, I appreciate it's a whistle-stop tour of our consultation, but I'm aware that we're just coming up to 20 minutes in now. Key points really is plan your consultation, and I appreciate that that everybody's reasons and rationale and resources for consultation will be very different. But I think it's key. Gone are the days of just knocking on people's doors with a clipboard. I think we need to be much more innovative about the way we approach and be approachable in the first instance. If you're not, people are not going to talk to you. And then I guess just think about why it is you're consulting, because there's, you know, I mean, I've got 2 bullet points there. Is it approval of your plans, or is it for initial thoughts and ideas? And I suppose our consultation was both of those in a way, but in 2 stages. You know, we wanted to find out people's aspirations and ideas initially, and then return to say, did we listen to you right? And then triangulating your information. Well, we do this in many other aspects in the landscape industry. You know, if we're going to create a map, we have to triangulate information to make sure that we're in the right place where we start from. And I suppose the bottom key point is probably the one that I personally consider the most important, is again to talk to the silent majority and not the vocal minority, because the vocal minority, in my experience, tend not to be representative of the overall community. So I hope that was of some use to you all. And now I think I'm going to stop sharing if I can, and hand over to Pete if we've got any questions.
Oh, Matt, that was brilliant, and we've already got one question in the chat, and that's from Elizabeth. Elizabeth, would you like to ask your question in person to Matt?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, Peter. Thank you very much, Matt. That was great. And so from my experience as I'm a community development worker and a trained facilitator. So my experience of working with public sector and also private sector bodies is that when regeneration projects or any kind of projects come to the table, there is an automatic response that yes, community consultation needs to take place, and there genuinely is a warmth towards that. And then as the process progresses, that is then superseded by fear and then risk, and then actually what develops is a kind of risk approach, and then nothing gets done other than the tick boxing exercise which you've commented on, which is obviously deeply distressing and frustrating for me and the community, and that I try to involve. So my question to you is how was your wider team supportive of your decision to do more kind of co-design process, and how is that continued in Cartrefi Conwy? Thank you. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Listen, I'm in a super fortunate position. I'm the only landscape guy in the entire company. When I joined the company, there was a genuine, we don't know what we're doing. So there was a willingness to try new techniques. And I think right from the off, as kind of creative lead, as it were, for this scheme, I just remain confident and resolute that this is what we needed to do. And I think when you hammer that home right from the start, then the powers that be that eventually sign off the check for whatever it is, that confidence is infectious. I completely appreciate that, for other organisations, it's not as straightforward as that. But yeah, I think you've got to look at the bigger picture holistically, and look for long term as well. So if we can demonstrate, and as an example, really quickly, I'm a finance director. They don't like spending money at the best of times, do they? So if we can demonstrate something to those guys, let's say on Peulwys, at any one time, roughly, we had approximately 10 void properties, okay? So let's say that's a lost rental income of £6,000 a month. So over 25 years, we've just paid for your £1.1 million investment just on lost rental income. So once you kind of demonstrate things in a tangible sense like that, then it becomes a bit easier, to get that buy-in and keep people with you on that journey all the way through.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for asking the question, and thanks, Matt, for answering it. Alison Davis has got a question about baselines. Alison, would you like to elaborate? You'll need to turn your microphone on.
Yes. Hi, Matt. I was wondering what, presumably, you've got baseline data for antisocial behaviour at the beginning and where it is now. And the same, I was thinking health and well-being, but I'm sure you've got loads more as well.
Do you know, Alison, I would like to say yes. I think ultimately, in hindsight, there's always much more that we can do, particularly when the projects like this involve so many different kind of departments and aspects within any organisation. Yes, we got before and after information with regards to antisocial behaviour, and it's gone down. We had information on voids, and interestingly, following the improvements, 12 months later, our housing team actually reported a waiting list for Peulwys, which had never happened before. So, I suppose there was lots of other anecdotal evidence. An example was, I think I was walking around, either councillors or a green flag judge might have been. Anyway, we walked past a litter bin, and the litter bin was full. We noted, we need to get in touch with the council and ask them to replace it. But the litter was actually stacked on top of the bin. So it was the first time I'd ever seen it. And I know it's not, it's only a small thing, but these are all indicative of real change, aren't they? So I think in hindsight, particularly with health and well-being, and I know that there is a health forgive me. We did it in Tre Cwm, similar. It was around health and well-being, but it was in partnership with Betsy Cadwallader. I think the approach could have been tailored a little bit different, but it's something that as we evolve and do more of these schemes, it becomes more and more important. And I think really the health and particularly the well-being agenda has taken on much more prominence over the last certainly the last 2 years with the pandemic, 3 to 5 years. So I think at the time when we did Peulwys, well-being was a term that, if I'm honest, we didn't really fully understand the implications of either. But we did have bits and pieces of before and after information, so we at least could demonstrate that there had been a tangible improvement in some areas.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. And I've noted that Mary O'Connor has asked a similar question about post-implementation surveys. I know you've worked at Tre Cwm, and I know you've worked in Llanrwst as well. Are you going to be publishing the results of any post-implementation surveys?
I think that's, if I'm honest, that's probably a question for my line manager as community regen manager. However, I do know that both for the scheme we're working on in Llanrwst, we are carrying out before and after impact assessment surveys. We did so in Tre Cwm as well. As to whether there's an internal desire to publish that, or whether that's just being used as a tool for us to then justify additional spends within the organisation, because our initial 3.5 million pot of money is kind of dwindling. But I think in being able to demonstrate those tangible improvements and those wider benefits that, tree cover, for example, the stuff that as landscape people we always find difficult to put a pound sign against, then that's a way of us then going back to our board and saying, come on guys, give us more budget, we've got more good work to do. But I think I would certainly like to look more into how we can capture all that information and possibly use it over 3 or 4, maybe 5 schemes to see whether there are any demonstrable patterns. Would be useful, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. Lucy from Social Farms and Gardens has got a question about dealing with competing aspirations. Lucy, would you?
Yeah, thanks very much, Pete. Great presentation, Matt. I was just wondering, we do obviously lots of engagement in the day job in Social Farms and Gardens, and I was just wondering about how you dealt with sort of competing priorities for certain spaces, and if there were any negative reactions to what you ended up sort of going with in the end.
Yeah, good question, Lucy. I think in a word, diplomacy. And I think when we initially carried out the consultation, obviously I got all the housing people together and did a bit of a pep talk as to, that it's really important that at this initial stage we manage expectations and we manage them well. We don't want any kind of rumours spiraling out of, that Cartrefi are going to build a monorail that's going to circle the estate and think, because stuff like that gains traction. We all know that. I mean, it did have some of the stuff that came back was a KFC, a swimming pool, a church. There was all kind of things. So I think to manage expectations at that very, very early stage really helped us out in the long run, because this was a process that went on for almost a year before we were really forming any plans to then go back to the community with. And I think in demonstrating what the community had told us when we then went back, it was much more easier for people to feel that, okay, right, I never said that wasn't my comment, but that was my neighbour's. So I think that helped us out a huge deal.
And Sarah Reed's got a question about how did you engage the silent majority?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this was where we kind of created this incentive idea, and we created A3 double-sided maps with a map of the estate with almost like a circular trail, and we invited everyone in the community to visit each one of these 5 feedback stations. In doing so, when you visited a feedback station, you got a stamp on the back of your hand, or I can't remember what it was, or a sticker that we put in the book. If you'd been to visit all 5 feedback stations, on the last feedback station, you hand in your completed map, and you were entered for a prize draw for, I think it was Love to Shop vouchers, which, to be fair, you know, any parent will gladly be entered in for a prize draw for Love to Shop vouchers. So that was really good. So that got the parents out. But I think because we kind of designed it as some kind of treasure trail, and crucially, guys, we did this in August, in the summer holidays. So it was a bit of a community event that was spread across the estate. So we got a really good turnout, and that's how we ensured. We did see the vocal minority, but interestingly enough, they kind of felt a little silent on the day, because they're once kind of very strong and sometimes personal views were a little shadowed by the fact that so many people that I suppose you could say were hard to engage, you know, working families, and they've got other priorities to think about, and that they actually came out on the day. So that was how we did that.
Brilliant. We're about to get cut off by Zoom, but we've still got a couple of questions, and I'm sure there are many more. So I'll ask Matt to answer Marco Mancini's question about how do you scale this up. And when we do get cut off, please use the link in the email to come back into this, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with the rest of the questions before 11 o'clock when Matt has to go.
Yeah, excellent.